Well, there we are. Okay, I got my coffee. It's Friday. Let's take a step back. Earlier this week, we were doing some kind of complicated stuff, but right now, what I want to do is I want to look at two concepts. They're kind of the same concept. They're called masking. And this isn't the normal mask that you would see in a design tool where you can like choose a shape or an image or something like that and apply it. There's actually this neat technique in many programming languages, web, iOS, etc., where you can actually mask a layer to its border. They call it the bounds. Okay, and then there's two different ways that we do that in Flow, and it's going to allow us to have techniques for doing various different things. But it's important to learn what they mean and how they act and react. So let's start with the scene. So the artboard scene, whatever you want to call it, we call it a scene sometimes. Today in this, it just happens to be called Artboard because I imported this from Sketch, and that's what a default name was there. Okay, so I have this star, all right, and the star has got these points, and because you know, if I double click into the star, this is the actual shape. And because the angles of the points are so sharp, and because the stroke width is 40, we get these longer sort of pointed ends that extend off of the artboard, okay, off the scene. And if I go and export this to HTML, open you up, double click in, we're going to go into the star, and there's our star.html. Let's just get rid of this. Okay. This is what our star looks like. See, the points hang all off the edges like that. Okay. Now, back in Flow, let's go back to Flow. Okay. So now back in Flow, what I can do is I can do this, click this button right up here. It's sort of the top right of the screen. And if I hover over it, it's called Mask Stage to the Artboard. The other way that I can go and have a look at that is if I go into View and I come down here and I do View and I go Show Toolbar Titles. All right, I can get these little titles up here underneath these buttons. Typically I know what they are, so I don't have the titles all the time. But here it's called Mask Scene. Okay, so if I turn it on and it's blue, it masks to the edge or the borders, i.e. the bounds of the scene. Okay, and then I can't see anything else. This is really a convenient thing for me because it actually helps me see what's actually going to happen when I export this to some kind of other program. It makes me be able to see it a little bit better. And sometimes there's so many things sort of flying around or moving that it's nice to just mask the scene and see only the things that are going to get rendered. Okay, but there is a consequence to this. So now let's just go and look back here. So this is how we rendered Flow to the web before. And now we're going to mask the scene. Okay, so this is the way it was. We hit export, we hit enter. Okay, and we're done with that. We refresh, this is what we have. I come back here, I'm going to turn that scene masking on. I'm going to export again. I'm going to come back to my page and I'm going to hit Command R. And look at that, those little points, they're gone. Whew, they're just gone. All right, so what this has actually done is it maps the scene masking. Okay, it maps the scene masking to overflow hidden for the root layer or the main div when we're exporting to HTML. And this is the same for iOS. The main layer will have its masks to bounds property on. Okay, so not only does the scene get masked, but also this gets translated out to whatever exports you're doing as well. Okay. Now this is very similar to the idea of layer masking. And layer masking is exactly the same concept. Okay, there's no difference, but it applies to a single layer. Now, did you know the scene itself is actually a layer? That's why these two concepts are identical. The scene is a layer. It's called the root layer. So it's the main thing that all the other layers get stuck into. And that's why we can do masking to the scene as well as masking to a layer, okay? So let's have a look at this shape again. Now, earlier I double-clicked into that. This is actually the shape of the path. And if I want to go and see the shape of the path, all right, I can come over here. I'm going to turn on relative mode because I don't want this to animate. And I'm going to change the stroke width to 0, all right? And this is actually what our shape looks like. Okay, it's a smaller shape than with the strokes on, off, on, off. And notice when I select it, there's this little border with these handles that go right around it. That is the size of the bounds of that layer. Okay, and an easier way for us to see what that frame looks like, and frames are always, like a layer is always going to have a rectangular frame. That's just the way things are. Despite the contents, it's always going to be rectangular no matter what. That frame, we can actually see it if we change the background color, okay? I'm going to change that background color to this green. And now it's really easy to see that thing, okay? So it's really easy to see where the frame is, okay? And if I export this now, and I come back to our web page, okay, we can see the same thing over here. The div that contains the shape has a background color of green, and then there's the shape inside of it, all right? And we can even see this bleed over a little bit if we change that stroke color, that stroke width back to 40. You see there's all these little bits of the background that we can see through this thing. Okay, I'm going to export one more time. I'm going to come back here, I'm going to render that again. Okay, so we are clipping to the scene. And so you can't see the tips outside of the scene. We are not yet clipping to the layer, okay? But we can see that frame right back there. And so now if I go back here into flow and I select that layer, okay, I've selected the star, I'm going to go right up here in the top, almost the topmost panel right here, and I'm going to click the mask to bounds property. And now it's going to do the same thing that we did with the scene, but it's only going to do it on the layer itself. I export one more time. And not only do we have overflow hidden on the entire artboard, the entire scene, now we have overflow hidden on that individual layer as well. Okay, so what is the point of this? Okay, it is, so you can use it for clipping to things, obviously, but for instance, let's just go ahead and make a really nice example of something that we could do. So I'm just going to create an empty artboard. Actually, I can go up here. I can say File, New, Empty Timeline. And let's just make that one consistent with the other one. Let's make it 400 by 400. All right. And now what I'm going to do, and I'm going to call this one Image. I am going to press Command I, and I'm going to import an image. So I have a 3x resolution image right here, just like that. Okay. It's 320 by 230. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a layer. I'm going to insert a layer, and here we just have an empty layer. And that empty layer, let's put a little background color on it. Let's make this one bright pink so we can see it. And I'm going to make it 200 by 200. So I'm going to lock and just make it a little bit bigger. All right. Now, one of the nice things about layers, which we've seen in another cast or something like that, is we can actually change the radius of this border around this thing. Now, you turn on masks to bounds, and then what you can do is you can increase the radius of that. It's called the corner radius, basically. But you can manipulate the border, and you can increase it until we get to 100. 100 being half of its width and height, which makes this thing now look like a circle. And again, this is the border of this thing. Okay, so I've created a circle for this layer, and now this is where layer masking becomes really interesting, because a group is a layer, all right? And if you can clip to the bounds of a group, then you can start to do some really interesting things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this image right into that group, just like that. And look at that. Now I have an image that's round and clipped to that group. Okay, so again, I'm going to undo here. All I did was I took this image and I put it right on there. And it turns it into like a circle. So this is really good for profiles. People always put little profiles and things. There's a bunch of different techniques that we can use with this one, but generally, just for instance, okay, this group now is able to mask that image, and now you can start to do some animations on that image. Okay, so you could do something really simple, like just growing that image inside of that circle. You can also move the image as well. Okay, you can grab that image and move it down at the same time. And now you got a different thing. And okay, maybe we change the easing on one of those guys. So we do something like a quint on the image itself. Maybe not quint. Maybe something a little bit softer like cubic or something like that, just to offset that feeling of this animation moving. Okay, there you go. So this is what layer masking is actually really useful for. Now, this is a super simple techniques, but we're actually going to, the reason why I'm bringing them up on Friday is because next week I want to show a couple different tricks with outlining some shapes so that you can do a little bit of text and typography as well. And this is going to help because we're going to use this masking technique in one of next week's flowcasts. Okay. All right, so this is a simple one today. Aside from that, a couple of announcements. Well, I guess there's just like one announcement that I would like to say is that we've come up with a list of things that we're going to put into Flow. And I think that what is going to happen over the next month or so is a lot of stability. So there are a few little bug fixes. There's not going to be an insane amount of new features coming out like there was in the last release where we released like Dribble and new updates to like the GIF exporter and things like this. But I think that there's going to be a little bit more stability and fixes, especially on our server side stuff. We found that there was a couple of things that we could clean up, so that importing from Figma and syncing with files ends up being a bit faster for everybody and more consistent, because in the last couple of days there's been a few, I wouldn't say outages, but slowages. Let's call them slowages. All right, so it's a good week. We learned lots, and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody next week and seeing more people submit their challenges. So we'll have another challenge about perception next week as well. All right, have a great weekend. Bye.